Thinking is a process of reaching a conclusion after careful consideration. It is a judgment, a choice between alternatives when all the facts are not yet and cannot yet be known, because they depend on events unfolding in the future. Therefore, decision making is not right or wrong, but rather good or bad. Welcome to Lesson Epsilon. So welcome back. This is now lesson 5. And what we're going to do in this lesson is we're going to go through the mistakes that 95% of traders make. I've made those mistakes. The current Axia traders make those mistakes. We all make those mistakes, not just on a daily basis, but throughout our careers. Now, the objective as a trader is to always be improving our processes so that we mitigate these mistakes and try and reduce the losses as a result until we learn the best way to make sure we don't repeat these mistakes. Now, the mistakes I'm going to take you through in this lesson have come directly from traders. So they were, we had this long group session and we spoke about the things we struggle with most over the course of the years of our careers. And these were the common mistakes taken from that group of traders. So what you're going to experience in this lesson is the mistakes that 95% of traders encounter daily. The understanding is the problem. Okay, you can understand the problem, of these mistakes. You can understand the ramifications of making these mistakes, but also the potential range of solutions. The consequence, well, at the end of the day, you're going to make these mistakes. You're going to repeat these same mistakes, which is why 95% of traders make these mistakes. But the consequence is you're not going to reduce the cost of making these mistakes. That said, obviously, if you learn from these mistakes now and you take some of those potential solutions and you adopt them into your own trading, you'll learn to navigate and mitigate the risks that pretty much all traders face. So, before we get going with that, I want to come back to what we spoke about in lesson 3 when we looked at the mistakes and of the best traders or the best investors over the years. And there's a very good reason I want to do that. I want to show you the common attributes of the greatest investors, because by recognizing that there were common mistakes amongst the greatest investors, you're going to recognize that traders like ourselves also make common errors, right? Because we make these common errors, we can also find very good solutions because we're all working to improve upon these mistakes. So these were the attributes. If you cast your mind back to lesson 3, we spoke about, the Warren Buffetts, the Druckenmillers, the George Soroses. We spoke about all the great investors of the time and what are the mistakes they made and what lessons we could learn from their mistakes. So some of the attributes that were common amongst all of them. Firstly, overconfidence. Right? We saw that a number of times how the moment they became overconfident, they made that mistake that cost them dearly. Trading outside of expertise. How often did we see investors getting more capital or they were doing really, really well and suddenly they felt they needed to trade out of their expertise, or better yet, they were sucked into trading someone else's expertise, like in the dot-com bubble with Druckenmiller. Exuberance, right? How often have we seen, again, investors being sucked into really big moves or very good returns of other portfolio managers, and suddenly they feel the need to do something exuberant. The inability to be wholly objective, right? And this is one we saw pretty much within every single one of the great investors, was that inability at times to always be 100% objective. Risk management. Right, this one cropped up a number of times, how with weak risk management, with the going all in. Okay, we saw that term a number of times, going all in or high conviction and risking more than we usually would. Right, how many times did that lead to very valuable lessons for the greatest investors? Ineffective decision making. Right, so these guys, the Warren Buffetts making 21% per annum for 50 years, the Druckenmillers, doing 30% over 30 years. Right. At some point, however, there was ineffective decision making, because if you can do 30% for 30 years, to make such a big mistake means somewhere along the line you just weren't 100% effective with the decision making. Failing. Okay, how often did we see these guys fail but get straight back up? Right, that's the hallmark of every one of these great investors. It doesn't matter whether they lost their bankroll 4 times, like we saw with Jesse Livermore. Right, it doesn't even matter, if they kept going despite, always backing their own ideas. Right, it doesn't matter. They all got back up and just kept trying and trying and trying. The result is, today they are regarded as the greatest investors because they accepted failing as part of the process. The last one, the timeline for success. And this is probably one of the most important ones, and it's going to be a highlight throughout this course. Recognize that trading is a career. Recognize trading is a process of skill adoption. If you begin to recognize that, if you start to see your career like a Buffett 50 years, like a Druckenmiller 30 years, like all of these guys that have been doing this for over 20, 30, 40 years, if you start to see that the timeline for success is not as narrow as maybe you thought, you're going to start to see your true potential over time. Okay, so those were the common attributes. We saw each one of these, 8 characteristics or attributes within every one of those, key investors. Now, the reason I mention this is because what we're going to do now is we're going to develop and we're going to take the common mistakes that 95% of traders are making, and we're going to take those mistakes and look at the problem. Right? We're going to understand the problem better, because when we understand the problem as well as the implications of that problem, then and only then can we develop a potential solution. Right? And that's the objective of this lesson. That's what I'm trying to teach you here, is I'm trying to teach you to take your own problems as a trader and find very good practical solutions to solve those problems. That's what you need to achieve by the end of this lesson. Okay, before we go into that, you're going to see the approach that I've adopted here is very similar to what we call the MBA. Okay, most of you know what an MBA is, and we're going to adopt the case study analysis that they use in the MBA, but we're just going to apply it to trading specific problems. Right now, it's going to be very simplified. Make no mistake, I'm not offering you an MBA of trading here. It's kind of a phrase that we like to use to summarize what you're ultimately going to learn through this lesson. Okay. Now, remember, history never repeats itself, but it does rhyme. Okay, you've heard this, this cliche phrase many, many times. But the reality is, this is ultimately all this is the success of the MBA series. Is that if you go through the over 9 million different case studies that the Harvard Business School has, you're going to recognize that yes, each situation is different in its own sense, but there's a lot of commonality between each one of the case studies. And it's that commonality that we want to pick out so that we can then, find solutions to it and avoid or mitigate the risks that come as a result of that mistake. Now, the case study method's been around for 100 years now. Okay, it was adopted by Harvard, and this was in the 1920s. So they've had 100 years to perfect the system of case studies. Now, today, over 14,000 business schools use this methodology, and like I said, there was talk that Harvard now has between 9 and 10 million different case studies. Today, in this lesson, I'm going to show you 5. Imagine having 9 million different case studies. Now, you can imagine how much experience and understanding you would have as a result if you were to somehow manage to go through all those 9 million case studies. Anyways, the important thing to look at is that trading's been around since the 12th, 13th century. We're talking very, very basic trading, okay? Not the kind of trading as we know it on the screens today. That sort of trading's been probably around, index trading, etc., probably since, the early 1900s. The point being that we will see a lot of these commonalities within trading, similar to the commonalities within, the millions of case studies that they have, in the MBA program. And the example I like to use here is the concept of a bubble. Okay, we've seen bubbles throughout the last 120 years. We saw the Tulip Mania bubble. We saw the Florida Mania. The 1929 Great Recession was pretty much a result of the Florida Mania, where everyone wanted to buy land in the sunny state. The dot-com mania, we all know that, 99-2000. The housing mania, okay, that was the property collapse of 2008, the leveraged property market. And then now finally the crypto mania, right? Since the beginning of 2017, Everyone's suddenly a crypto trader. And okay, so we see these manias throughout history. Now they're all different, they're all unique in their own way, and in hindsight, they're all bubbles. The reality is we can take these 5 examples and we can learn from them. We can find the commonalities that led to the bubble being blown. We can also look at some of the patterns and the opportunities as a result of when those bubbles finally burst. And that's what we're doing here. We're taking the common mistakes of 95% of traders and we're finding solutions for them so that you can adopt those solutions and be better off for it. Now, what is the case study method? In a very simple sense. Imagine yourself in a classroom. You've got a professor in front and they come and describe a situation to you. So we read and we, very often some of these situations can be 1 or 2 pages long. Sometimes they can be quite significantly long, right? But it's the situation analysis. Now the situations I'm going to present you with are very summarized. They're very short, but you'll get the gist of it. The students then read it alone for very good reason, right? We don't want to bring groupthink into it at this point. So what I'm going to do, as you'll see in the next couple of slides, is I'm going to read the situation to you, and then I'm going to give you time. I really, really want you to pause. Push the pause button when we get to that point. I'm going to tell you pause now, and go and spend 15 minutes, 20 minutes, a half an hour, an hour. Spend an entire day if you need to, right? Make sure you understand the situation, and make sure you break it down correctly in the format I'm going to give it to you in. Now, the reason you do this on your own first is so that you can develop your own ability to think, right? Make no mistake, it's not that easy to think. It's quite an exhaustive process, but hopefully by the end of this course, you're going to recognize that this entire course is premised on the fact that I want to help you to think for yourself. I'm not going to give you the answers to, the Holy Grail because they don't exist. But what I am going to give you is hopefully a platform to think for yourself and develop yourself going forward. So you're going to think, right? Once you've done that, you're going to analyze the problem. Once individuals have had the time to think on their own, they come back into groups. And they now analyze it. So now they come to the groupthink stage where they're bouncing ideas. Or what did you think of this? What did you think of that? Oh, that's a good idea. That's a good idea. Right? So that way we go from having our own understanding to then being able to almost debate and understand other people's perspective. And then finally, the groups will all come together in a classroom and they'll discuss the potential solutions for the problems. Right, so it's almost like we go from our own understanding, we evolve our understanding by listening to other people and understanding other people's interpretations, and then finally we listen to all the range of potential solutions, and from that we can then determine, well, this is probably the best solution because of A, B, and C. These solutions are also good, they could have worked, but they maybe didn't get the same kind of output as the other options, right? And that's the point. It's about seeing a problem, seeing that there's no one way to solve a problem. There's multiple ways to solve a problem. Sometimes some are better and sometimes some are worse. And it all depends, right? This is something you've got to, understand is that I might tell you the best way to solve the problem of, of overtrading is to go build and automate your entire system. The reality is that might be a problem that I can solve because I've got available resources. Okay, I've got a tech guy and he can go build all the algorithms for me. Now that might be the best solution for me, but the reality is that solution might not even suit you simply because you don't have the same kind of resource capability as I do. So every solution, there's no one solution. There's just a better and a worse solution based on your own personal circumstances. Now, and that's what we're trying to say here. The mistake often made is the search for one right answer. There's no one right answer. There's no right and wrong. Right? A lot of you are going to probably feel, as you're going through the exercise, you're going to probably feel like you need to compare it and you're going to need to get someone to confirm that you are right or that your approach is right. That's not the purpose of this exercise. Now, important, the answer is not as important as the methodology of confronting different ideas. And this is the crux. This is what makes the MBA so successful, right? Is that you are accepting that there's multiple different methods and different ways of doing something. And it's when you can take all of those ways, you develop yourself, you develop your understanding, you almost widen your ability to understand different things. Okay. Now, the power of the case study, in a summary, is the personal, practical problem solving. Right? That's what it comes down to. It's personal, practical problem solving. Okay, now, this is the case study process. These are the steps you're going to take. And when I give you time to think, so how are we going to do it? We're going to start off with the situation analysis. I will go through the situation with you. You will all relate to every one of these case studies. If you don't, you're a remarkable trader. I want to meet you in person. All right? The reality is, at some point in your career, you've probably felt, experienced, or made these same mistakes because they're common amongst all the traders I know. That's the first step. So we're going to do that step together. Then I'm going to hit pause. I'm going to tell you guys, go away now. Have a think. All right? Spend the amount of time you need to. Firstly, identify the problem. So read the case study and identify the problems with it. There's very often you'll see multiple problems. Don't think just there's one problem. There's a lot of different problems. Now, with those problems, we have what we call ramifications or the ripple effect. In other words, there's a problem, and because you're committing that problem, a number of other different things will end up cropping up as a result. Again, I'll explain this to you on the next slide. The last part is, I've got this problem. How can I solve it? What can I do? It could be something practical. It could be something, physiological. It could be anything. Be creative with your problem solving. But make sure that you also think of your practical solutions in terms of yourself. All right? Remember, I'm trying to get you to create something for you. Right? So it's got to be applicable to you. Now, you got to think of, any kind of anything that can help you solve that problem. Right? That is ultimately you capable of implementing into your trading. That's what you're trying to achieve with this case study process. Okay, so what do we mean now by the ripple impact? All right, this is that third step. It's very simple. When we look at a problem, so we get to the end of the day and I went 3 times through my stop. Right? That's the problem. The problem is I lost 3 times more money than I'm allowed to because that's the rules I've imposed on myself. So we see that as the outcome. That's all we see. We see that drop in the water. The problem is very often what we'll do is we'll associate the problem with, for example, I used too much risk. And we call that the problem. But very often there's a number of other little ripples that lead up to that problem of being in a 10 lot. And I explained this a little bit to you in one of the previous lessons. But ultimately it's about really almost magnifying, really looking deep into that problem of being in a 10 lot trade when I'm used to being in a 2 lot trade, and really just trying to figure out exactly what led to that point. For example, we use this idea of, we said that one of the biggest, mistakes that a lot of traders make is they'll be in a trade, they'll get out of most of the trade and they'll keep a little bit on. And we use the example particularly of Tesla. And I'll say, well, yeah, I stopped out of 90% of it, but I kept 10 shares. And then all of a sudden, Tesla's up another 10%, and then, the bias kicks in. Well, I'm short 10 shares, it's gone another 10%, it's gone too far too fast. And suddenly, they've now doubled the position, to 20 shares. And then all of a sudden, the position's 5% offside. Now, they double the risk. And then all of a sudden, the stock is now way too overbought. And suddenly, they push in 50 shares, and now they're 80 shares short. Right? All they're doing is compounding the error. Now, when we look at this problem, we'll say, well, the 10 lots, was the reason I lost all this money, or I got stopped out, 3 times more than expected. We'll see that as the problem, but it wasn't. The true underlying problem, and the real problem we need to solve is, how do I make sure that when I exit a trade, I exit all of it and not even keep the 10 shares? And that's what the ripple effect is. It's getting to the real essence of the problem. Not what we think, not what appears to be the problem. What the real essence of the problem is or was. Okay, now, case study number 1. All right, put your MBA hats on. We're now all MBA students. Okay, this is going to be a fun little process. And you've all heard this word before, overtrading. Okay, you all know what overtrading is. You're doing more trades than you usually should. That's what overtrading is. So the situation, and this has come, all of these, by the way, these situations have come from traders. I've actually quoted them. So this trader said, I find myself being sucked into the volatility and forced to trade because of the potential for opportunity. I don't follow any real strategy. I just go with the flow because there's movement in the markets. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to push the pause button. Go away and firstly tell me, what are the problems you can see within the situation? Anything, right? Note any problems you can see, and we'll go through this in a minute, so don't worry about the first case study. We're going to do 5 of these. You'll get good at it by the end of it. Tell me all the problems. The second part, what are the ramifications of those problems that you can see? Number 3, the last part, what solutions, what practical solutions would you implement? So assume this is you. What practical solution would you implement yourself to make sure that you don't overtrade in the future? Okay, push pause now, and we'll come back and we'll go through the rest of this in a moment. Okay, so I haven't paused obviously, but I hope you have paused. Now, I hope you've taken the time. It's important you do this, guys. This is a very, very important lesson. Remember, I can preach to you all you want. I can tell you the theory. I can tell you all the things you need to do. But only you can learn the lesson by trusting the process I'm giving you to do. So it's important you do this. Now, let's go and look at this. So, case study number 1. All right. I found myself being sucked into the volatility and forced to trade because of the potential for opportunity. I don't follow any real strategy. I just go with the flow because there is movement in the markets. Now, you've done the analysis on your own. You've analyzed this on your own. You've looked at the problems. You've looked at the ramifications or the ripples, and you found potential solutions. So now we're coming back as a class. Imagine we're in the classroom now, and we're going to discuss this together. So I'm going to give you my understanding of the situation, not the right understanding, just my understanding. So these were my thoughts as a result of this situation. So the first thing, the trader says they're forced to trade, right? That in its own is a massive problem. You're never forced to trade. You're never forced to take risk. That is the one thing you do control and always control, is when you want to trade. Okay, so there's something in the psychology of this trader where he feels forced to trade. He needs to do something about that. That is a problem. Lose structure and shape, right? You hear this term a lot in football. When a team loses their shape or their structure, right? Ultimately, there are implications for that, which means they don't defend so well or they don't perform at an optimal state. So this trader is losing structure or he's forgetting the plan when there is volatility. Another problem, he talks about potential opportunity. So he's speaking here as though he assumes that volatility implies opportunity. How's that possible, right? Unless you've backtested this strategy called volatility, right, you don't know that it's opportunity. Just because price moves up and down doesn't mean it's opportunity. Risk, reward, and probabilities, okay? You can see this trader is not thinking in terms of risk, reward, or probabilities, right? Because if you're being sucked into something, if you're being brought into the game by the market, you don't understand where your risk is, and you, for consequence, you cannot understand the probabilities of success. The last part, go with the flow. I mean, what is go with the flow? Seems like one of those, we spoke about rules of thumb being one of the most dangerous things of, Santa Claus rally and sell in May and go away. This is one of those, go with the flow. What does that even mean? It's too subjective. There's nothing that you can objectively identify within go with the flow. So those are some of the problems I identified within this trader situation. Now the ripples, in other words, what are the implications of these problems this trader's facing? Well, firstly, he's going to reinforce bad behaviors. Why? What tends to happen when you go with the flow and you make money is you get that reinforced habit where your brain says to you, hey, you made money, you went with the flow. You made good money. Okay. Now, it's not to say you can't make money going with the flow. Of course you can. There's momentum in the market. There's a lot of participants all, heading in the same direction. But the reality is there are always implications of the decisions you make. right? It doesn't matter, and this is the problem traders make. They focus on the output. I made money, therefore I must have done the right thing. It doesn't work that way. Right? And that's why we assess the implications, because when you make money, going with the flow, you have to ask yourself, were you or were you not distracted from your game plan? Now, the simple truth is, if you are trading outside of your game plan and committing to risk to something you don't 100% understand, there's an opportunity cost. Okay, you're foregoing the potential to maximize your earning potential on something you understand. Let me repeat that. It's very important. The moment you're in the market on something you don't understand, you cannot maximize should there be an opportunity that you understand that comes along. And that's how you have to relate things. You almost have to say to yourself, well, going with the flow meant I made $100, but if I was disciplined, stuck to the plan, waited for the strategy that I know everything about, I would have made $1,000. And that's one of the ramifications with this, implication or these problems as traders finding. And that's where we get to. It's this input-output. The moment you are entering this go with the flow, there's a number of things you don't understand. Okay, you don't understand volatility, or you understand the concept of it, but you don't understand, the ultimate structure of what volatility means. Which means to do well within this concept called volatility, you're having to input a lot more, both financial capital, emotional capital, energy capital, focus capital, all of these things you're having to give in order to be successful within this situation. And that's very costly. Why? Because you've only got so much emotional capital, right? Imagine the thing swinging around, going up and down, up and down. That's costing you. Imagine, your P&L is swinging up and down. Could you have used that capital better elsewhere? Your energy, right? Could you have used that focus and time on a trade strategy later in the day that would have maximized your opportunity? Okay, that is some of the ramifications and results of you going with the flow. Now, the solutions. Now, remember what I said to you. These solutions are applicable to me. And a lot of the solutions I'm going to show you in all of these case studies, I'm going to give you in part 4. In other words, I'm going to give you the tools, the calendars, the risk management tools, so that you've got them, right? So that they are applicable to you. So the first is develop a volatility strategy. There's nothing wrong with going with the flow, but at least develop a strategy, an approach, a game plan. So whenever the go with the flow, however you identify that comes along, you simply follow the steps. The second one, adjust risk during volatility. So again, one of the biggest mistakes a lot of traders make when it's volatile is it's an uncomfortable, unfamiliar type of trading. So what do? Right? They tend to change the way they trade. So adjust your risk when you have this thing called volatility. How about setting a maximum trade limit alert? In other words, if you overtrade and you know that normally you do 50 trades in a day, the moment you get to 51 trades, set an alert. Let it make you aware. Let an alarm go off. Right? And the same is maximum markets limit alert. Very often, if you're overtrading, you're probably also trading over a number of different markets. So again, if you typically only trade one market a day and you find yourself in 3 markets, let the alert recognize that for you. Right? Don't forget, trading, we get sucked into things. We get sucked into the heat of the moment. These alerts ultimately prompt you and allow you to recognize when you're being sucked in. Okay, that's case study number 1. Now, I hope you found that useful. Okay, I hope you could relate to it. It's important you relate to every one of these case studies because that way you will learn from them. So, case study number 2. Focus on profit and loss. This is a favorite. This one literally comes up with every single trader, right? It's that constant focus on P&L. So here's the situation. I find when I'm nicely up on the day that the trades I do for the rest of the day, I'm somewhat defensive. I change the size and I use and also, I basically change the size of the trade and the stop that they would normally use. Also on days where I'm down, I trade more freely and usually find I can get back to scratch more easily. Okay, scratch is back to 0. In other words, as you were down on the day, you're back to 0 again. If I get close to my daily target, I move my target on open trades to lock in the winner. Now go away, push the pause button, and have a think about this. An interesting one. No doubt you can relate to this. Personally, I've been doing this for 9 years and I can relate to this because I still do a lot of the problems from this. Okay, let's go through it. What are the problems? Well, the first one, up nicely on the day. What does that even mean? What does up nicely on the day even mean? Right, if you told me that I've hit my target of making £1,000 every day, that's very different to I'm up nicely on the day. It's too subjective. Right? Defensive. Right? Why on earth would you go defensive? It makes no sense to be defensive. The moment you're defensive, right, you're changing your approach. Why would you change your approach simply because you've made money or lost money? Change size and stops. Again, if you're changing the size and the stops, it means you're not following a structured plan. You're simply at the mercy of your P&L. Trade more freely. Okay, this is the most dangerous one. This is the biggest problem out of this entire case study, which is, why are you trading more freely? Surely you should trade the exact same way regardless of what the strategy is, regardless of what the P&L is, regardless of anything. Move the targets. Right? The moment I see someone talking about moving targets, it means you don't have the structure in place. You don't understand ultimately your own trade strategy. And all this can be summarized as process changes. Okay? All this trader is doing, he's changing the process in every situation, whether it's the risk, whether it's the targets, whether it's his approach he's taking. He's changing the entire process to match the P&L. Okay, this is one of the ramifications. This is one of the ripples, which is that he is a victim of his P&L ultimately. Okay, that means he will never be able to build consistency because he's at the mercy of his P&L. If his P&L is up, he'll trade one way. If his P&L is down, he'll trade another way. If it's flat, he'll trade another way. How can you be consistent with that sort of approach? And that's what I'm saying in the next line. He never follows a consistent approach or a consistent process. Limit upside. And this is one of the key ramifications of this problem, is that if you become defensive, if you become P&L focused, you limit your potential for upside. Right? That's that I'm up nicely on the day. Increase downside. The moment you start trading freely, you open yourself up and you expose yourself to really big drawdowns. The last one, outcomes-based approach. This trader, one of the ramifications of this problem he has in this situation is that everything is dependent on outcomes. Nothing is dependent on process. Now, we spoke about this right at the beginning, and I'm going to reiterate this. If there's one goal you want to achieve from this course and in your career, is to become process driven. The outcomes matter nothing. Okay, the outcomes are the byproduct of the processes. You always, as a rule of thumb, this is the one rule of thumb you can adopt and must repeat. You always focus on the processes. Always. You always adjust the processes. You're always working on the processes. The outputs take care of themselves. Okay. Some of the solutions. Well, a risk management tool. Very clearly, this trader needs a risk management tool. Why? A risk management tool is just structure. It's something that'll tell him you're risking this much, this is your stop, this is your target. So he needs something precise, some structure in place. Strategic, accountable process. Okay. Very clearly, this trader is adjusting toward the P&L. But how would he ever recognize this? Well, the best way to do that is to have some form of a journal. Right? In your journal, we spoke about variances. Compare what you should have done to what you should do. That way you're holding yourself accountable. Bridge orders. Right? This is a nice practical one, something I like a lot. Okay, bridge orders simply, when you get filled, it automatically puts your stop and target in. And the stop and target are OCO, which means if the stop gets hit first, it pulls your target. If the target gets hit first, it pulls your stop. This works wonders for me because it means that you can't just suddenly adjust the target. You can't adjust the stop based on how you feel. Now, this is no view of P&L that I adopted probably in my 3rd year of trading because I recognized my P&L was hindering my performance. You will never see a P&L box on my screen. Why? Because the reality is I don't need it. I don't need to know my P&L. Why? Because I've got a risk management tool that tells me how much I should risk on each trade. And equally, it also tells me when I should stop trading. At any point in the day, I don't need to know what the number is. All I need to know is how much must I risk on the next trade? And most importantly, when should I stop trading? And the system does that for me. And this is the tool that you're going to learn and be exposed to and will get in part 4 of this course. The last part is strategic approach to risk. And this is important. When we speak about up nicely on the day, that's not sufficient. That's not a strategy. If you told me that you want to make £1,000 a day, at least that's a bit more of a strategy. Okay, so there is a strategic approach to risk, and we'll talk a lot about that in part 4, but this is another potential solution that will help this trader to focus less on outputs, i.e. profit and loss, and more on the processes. Okay, that's case study number 2. Now we're going to do one more case study before we take a break. And this case study is one it's brilliant, because this is probably the most common mistake I heard early on in my career. It's probably the most common mistake I used as an excuse early in my career, which is I was trading price action. So the situation, I got sucked into the price action. I had strong plan that market was going up today. As soon as the buying came in, I went with it. It was really choppy and I kept panicking out because it wouldn't go. At the end of the day, the market rallied exactly like I said it would, and I lost money doing the right trade. Now, take the time, go away, analyze it on your own. What are the problems within that case study? What are the ramifications? And what tools would you develop for yourself to overcome being sucked into the price action? Okay, so straight away, hopefully you recognize, there's a lot of problems in this. And it's wonderful. Look, one of the things I've been blessed with in my career is when you mentor a lot of guys, it's not that you get advanced knowledge, you can just relate to them. Because guess what? I've made this mistake personally. I still make this mistake to this day. The point being is that you get a very good understanding of how people think and why they think the way they do. So there's a lot of problems within the situation, and we'll go through them. The first one is strong plan. Okay, very clearly, you didn't have a strong plan if you got sucked in. Okay, strong plan is also very suggestive that you've got the right plan. Right? And that's a big problem in its own, and we'll talk about that when we talk a little bit about bias. Is buying came in an objective statement? Right? I got sucked into the price action, buying came in. What does buying came in mean? Was price going up? Is that objective? Or was there something identifiable in terms of a variable that you could lean on? Right? So when he speaks about buying coming in, that's too subjective. It's not something that's repeatable as an observation. Went with it. What does that even mean? I went with it. That's making an assumption that everyone is in the right sort of trade. Again, reinforcing that bias. Panicking. Right? Why are you panicking? If you're panicking, that's a problem in its own. You should never panic. All right? Trading is just a decision-making process. I get in, I put a stop, I get a target. If you're panicking, it means you do not have a strategic approach. You're just gambling. Exactly like I said. Okay? Again, reinforcing that idea of I need to be right. I was right. Right? Lost doing the right thing. And there in it, in that last sentence summarizes the entire thing, which is it did what I said it should do. Right? The justification. Note the justification. I lost because of the market, not because of my own process or strategic approach. Right? And that loss doing the right thing is the real nail in the coffin, which is it's that assumption that I was doing the right thing. Remember, there's no wrong and right in trading. There's just degrees of probability. So some of the ramifications of these problems and this way of thinking in this situation, well, first is accountability. This trader's taking no accountability. Right? And if I was to look at this problem and look at a loss a trader was taking, the first thing I'd say is you're not holding yourself accountable. That's the real problem. Okay? The second thing, he's reinforcing subjective trading here. What do we mean by that? Well, the fact that he's saying the buying came in, I went with the flow, I did the right trade, all he's doing is reinforcing his subjective approach to trading, as opposed to volume was above 10,000, the candlestick started doing one time framing after 3 candles I bought, and the market stopped me out and I lost money. They're two very different things. One is a very subjective approach to going with the flow, or getting sucked into the price action, and the other is an objective. In other words, I can always observe one time framing. I can always observe volume above a certain threshold. These are objective facts that I can lean on in the future. Emotion of choppy. Okay, when someone is being sucked into a choppy price action and they're showing emotion, right, that's never going to lead to good decision making. The emotion of losing being right. Okay, there's a lot of ramifications with this problem, which is that they're showing emotion because they're losing money whilst they feel they were right. And the last one, the real sort of very strong one here, is the bias. That bias to have done the right thing, the right trade. I wasn't wrong. Right? All of this is reinforcing really, really bad cognitive behaviors. So solutions. Solution number one, a signal-based system. Right? It's as simple as it is. If volume goes above 10,000 and we break above a key level, then I buy. Right? There's nothing subjective about that. There's nothing wishy-washy. There is a signal that tells you when to buy the market. You don't have to lean on this idea of I was trading price action, I went with the flow. Right? It's as simple as threshold was triggered, got above a certain price, I joined in. A precise strategic process. It looks as though this trader doesn't have a good strategic process. How do we know that? Well, because he was getting chopped about. He kept getting in and out of the same trade idea. Right? And that's the next solution. A trade strategy should be executed once. The moment you're executing something more than once, and your log is telling you entered the same trade idea 3 times in a row, that's telling you something about your decision-making process. It's telling you something about your strategic approach. It's wrong, right? That's the reality, or it's not precise enough. And the last one, a defined stop, right? If you're getting chopped, if you're getting emotional, it's because you don't understand the risk of the trade. You don't understand where you're wrong in the trade, which means you don't have a trade. You've just got a gamble or a potential to try and make easy money, right? Remember, we're trying to, and again, I never want to come across as I don't take gamble trades. Heck, I do gamble trades every single day of the week. The point is, this entire course is built on us trying to become better and taking less gambling trades so that in the long run, we don't kill ourselves, we don't blow ourselves out, but more importantly, we start to reduce the losses and we obviously get to keep more of the upside. That's the purpose of all of this. Okay, so that's now our first 3 case studies. Go take a break. Right? If you're going to take a day's break, that's fine as well. Go have a think, and when we come back, we'll come back to the next 2 most common mistakes that 95% of traders make.